Before moving on to the story, don't forget to subscribe and like. Have a nice listening time. When we first moved into the house, it felt perfect. A fresh start, a new beginning. My wife, Linda, and I had spent months searching for a place to raise our children, Emma and Noah. We wanted something quiet, away from the chaos of the city, somewhere they could grow up safely. This house, an old Victorian home, nestled in a peaceful neighborhood, seemed ideal. I remember standing in the front yard, admiring the way the evening sun cast long shadows over the lawn, how the breeze carried the scent of pine from the woods beyond. It felt like home. But from the moment we stepped inside, there was a heaviness to the air, something I couldn't quite place. The rooms were large, with high ceilings and wooden floors that creaked underfoot. There were plenty of windows, yet the house always felt dim, like it was resisting the sunlight. Still, I brushed it off. We were exhausted from the move, and I assumed it was just the stress of starting over. The first few days were uneventful. We spent our time unpacking, rearranging furniture, and getting to know the neighbors. Emma and Noah explored the house, laughing and running through the halls, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. They especially loved the attic, which was spacious and filled with old trunks and forgotten relics left by the previous owners. Linda and I laughed as they played pirates, their imaginations running wild with stories of buried treasure and hidden maps. But then, the small things began to happen. It started with Emma. She was the first to mention the shadows. "Daddy, there's someone in my room," she said one night as I was tucking her into bed. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. I frowned. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Who's in your room?" She pointed to the corner, her finger trembling slightly. "Over there. In the corner. It moves when I'm not looking." I glanced at the corner, seeing nothing but darkness. "There's no one there, Emma. It's just your imagination. You're tired. Get some sleep, okay?" She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the shadowy corner as I turned off the light. I reassured myself that it was just a child's overactive imagination. After all, we had just moved to a new, unfamiliar house. It was normal for kids to feel uneasy at first, right? But the shadows didn't stop. A few days later, while we were unpacking boxes in the living room, Emma came running downstairs, pale and trembling. "It's in my room again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I exchanged a look with Linda, who frowned but didn't say anything. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'll come check." I went upstairs with Emma, determined to prove to her that there was nothing to be afraid of. But when I entered her room, a chill ran down my spine. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, like a draft had swept through the room, even though the windows were closed. I stood there, staring into the corner she had pointed to, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw something. Just the faintest movement, like a shadow shifting in the darkness. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't mention it to Linda, not wanting to worry her. We had enough to deal with between the move and settling into the new neighborhood. I chalked it up to the stress of everything, to the exhaustion that had been weighing on me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just Emma. Noah, usually a lively, carefree 6-year-old, became unusually quiet. He would sit in the corner of the living room, staring out the window for hours, barely speaking a word. When we asked him what was wrong, he would just shrug, his eyes distant. It was unlike him. The boy who used to run around the house playing make-believe now seemed withdrawn, as if something had drained the life out of him. One night, Linda found an old box in the attic while we were organizing the last of our belongings. It wasn't ours. Inside, there were faded photographs and a leather-bound journal, yellowed with age. The photographs were unsettling, black and white images of the house from decades ago, but something about them was off. In each photo, there was a shadowy figure in the background, always watching, always present. Linda's hands shook as she opened the journal. This belonged to someone who lived here before," she murmured, flipping through the pages. The entries were filled with disturbing accounts of strange occurrences, whispered voices, cold drafts, figures moving in the dark. The woman who had written the journal, someone named Evelyn, spoke of a presence in the house, something she couldn't see but could always feel. The more Linda read, the more unnerved we became. One entry, in particular, stood out. The shadows are everywhere now. I can't escape them. They watch me, follow me, and whisper things I can't understand. I'm so afraid. My husband doesn't believe me. He says it's all in my head, but I know better. The house wants us gone. Or worse. We should have left then. Packed our things and never looked back. But we didn't. We stayed, convincing ourselves that it was just the ramblings of a disturbed mind. We thought we were stronger than whatever haunted this place. We were wrong. The night everything changed was cold and stormy. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the house groaned like it was alive. I remember sitting by the fireplace, trying to read, while Linda was upstairs putting the kids to bed. The flames flickered in the hearth, casting long shadows across the walls. Suddenly, Noah screamed. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear when a child has a nightmare. It was blood-curdling, primal, filled with pure terror. I dropped my book and sprinted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I burst into Noah's room, I froze. He was standing in the middle of the room, his small body trembling, his eyes wide and glazed over. He wasn't moving, just staring at something in the far corner. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, its body a mass of shifting shadows, stood in the corner, watching us. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were two burning red orbs that glowed with malevolent intensity. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing down, suffocating me. "Noah!" I shouted, rushing to him, but he didn't respond. He was frozen, as if trapped in some horrific trance. I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him, but he didn't react. His skin was ice cold. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished. Noah collapsed to the floor, his body limp and lifeless. Linda rushed in, screaming as she saw our son's body crumpled on the ground. I tried to revive him, but it was no use. Noah was gone. We called an ambulance, but the paramedics couldn't explain it. There was no sign of trauma, no reason for his sudden death. It was as if his life had simply been stolen from him in an instant. We buried Noah 2 days later, but the house didn't give us time to grieve. The terror had only just begun. Linda changed after Noah's death. She became distant, spending hours alone in our bedroom, staring out the window or talking to herself in low whispers. I tried to comfort her, but she pushed me away. She told me the shadows were speaking to her, telling her things, showing her visions. She was convinced they were coming for her next. And then, one night, I woke up to find her standing in front of the mirror in our bathroom, holding a razor to her wrist. "They're waiting for me," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "They want me to join them." I rushed toward her, grabbing the razor from her hand just in time. "Linda, no!" I shouted, my voice shaking with fear and desperation. But her eyes, they were hollow, like she was no longer truly there. Her skin had become pale, almost translucent, and she stared at her reflection as if she didn't recognize herself. "They said I can't escape," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "They took Noah, and now they want me. I see them in every shadow." I held her close, trying to soothe her trembling body, but I could feel it, too. The weight of something dark and malevolent pressing down on us, as if the very air was filled with a presence we couldn't fight. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse, breathing in sync with us, waiting for their moment. After that night, Linda withdrew even more, rarely speaking, rarely eating. She would spend hours sitting in the dark, her eyes unfocused, her hands trembling. She had become a shell of the woman I married, consumed by the evil lurking in the house. I couldn't help her, no matter how hard I tried. Every day, I watched the life drain from her, just like it had with Noah. It wasn't long before I found her again, this time too late. I came home from the grocery store, bags in hand, hoping to surprise her with her favorite meal. The house was quiet, too quiet. I called out her name, but there was no answer. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on me as I climbed the stairs, dreading what I might find. She was in the bathroom again, standing in front of the mirror, but this time her wrists were already slashed, deep crimson streaks running down her pale arms. Blood pooled at her feet, soaking into the white tiles. Her face was ashen, and she was smiling as if she had found some sick peace in the horror of it all. "They said I'd be free," she whispered as I cradled her limp body in my arms, her blood staining my hands. "But they lied." She died in my arms, her last breath escaping her lips like a sigh of relief, and I was left screaming into the empty house, consumed by grief and rage. The shadows seemed to close in around me, whispering, laughing, feeding on my despair. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Not after what had happened to my family. I tried to take Emma and leave, but every time we approached the front door, it would slam shut, locking us inside. Windows that had opened easily before were now stuck, as if the house itself was alive, trapping us within its dark grip. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before the shadows came for Emma. I tried everything. I called priests, mediums, anyone who might have an answer. But nothing worked. The shadows only grew stronger, more brazen. Emma became distant, just like Noah had, her once bright eyes now clouded with fear. She wouldn't sleep in her room anymore, and I didn't blame her. She started waking up in the middle of the night, screaming about the man in the corner, the same figure Noah had seen. Then, one night, I woke to find Emma standing at the foot of my bed. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and she was whispering something under her breath. I sat up, reaching out to her, but when I touched her shoulder, she collapsed, her small body crumpling to the floor, lifeless. I screamed for hours, holding her cold, limp form, begging for some explanation, for some reason why this was happening. But there was nothing, just silence and the ever-present shadows, lurking, waiting. They had taken everything from me. My son, my wife, and now my little girl. I buried Emma beside Noah and Linda. The graveyard was empty except for me and the wind, howling through the trees like the cries of the dead. As I stood there, staring at the fresh mound of earth where my daughter lay, I felt a hand on my shoulder. When I turned, there was no one there, just the shadows, always watching. I returned to the house, alone now, with nothing but my grief and guilt for company. The house seemed to be waiting for me, its doors creaking open as if welcoming me back into its clutches. I knew it wouldn't let me leave. It had claimed my family, and now it wanted me. The final night came sooner than I expected. I sat in the living room, staring into the empty fireplace, waiting for the inevitable. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. The shadows had grown darker, thicker, swirling around me like predators circling their prey. I could feel its presence, his presence, the entity that had taken everything from me. It whispered in my ear, its voice like a cold wind slicing through my mind. "You're next." I didn't fight it. There was no point. I had nothing left to live for. The entity had taken my family, my hope, my life. It was only a matter of time before it took me, too. As the shadows closed in, I felt a sudden pressure on my chest, like an invisible hand squeezing the life out of me. I gasped for breath, my vision blurring, but I didn't resist. I welcomed the darkness, hoping that, in death, I might find some peace, some release from the torment that had haunted me for so long. The last thing I saw before the shadows swallowed me was the figure standing in the corner, its red eyes glowing with triumph, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. It had won. I don't know what happens after death, but I do know one thing: the house still stands, and it's still waiting, watching, for its next victim.